Well, Jon Snow has been speaking to John Savage about how the experiences of different generations of teenagers compare.
John Savage, I think you sort of contend that this generation of teenagers are being duffed up worse than any generation before. Is that your argument?
Yes, it's of course it's an argument. There are obviously nuances, but I think compared to when I was growing up, there are many differences. Tuition fees, in particular, but I also think that in general, and this is certainly shown by the coalition government and its various policies, that youth is undervalued in our society. And I think that's a great shame, because if you undervalue youth, you're actually not wishing to engage with the future or even to conceive that a future might exist.
But you know, even your own film, and I know you were talking about when you were growing up, and I'm not suggesting that you grew up in 1904, but even your film shows this extraordinary young lad working 74 hours a week. That's not going to face anybody in this generation.
No, I think that obviously expectations have risen, which is a good thing. And I also think that the whole nature of society has changed, certainly in the areas in which we cover in the film.
First, we were just children. And then all of a sudden, we were supposed to be adults.
The end of child labour or certainly the cutting down of child labour in the early years of the 20th century coincides with youth really being conceptualised and defined as a separate stage of life, which then creates a whole series of problems from the point of view of adults and governments who are trying to control youth, this new stage of life, who is seen as troublesome, and also from the point of view of the youth themselves, who once they're called adolescents, aged between 13 and 24 is the definition, start to think, well, if we are a separate stage of life, then what are we?
People thought there was no hope for youth, but we were searching for something to believe in, and we were willing to fight for it.
The book ends, and the film ends in 1944-45, with the teenager being defined, and which is sort of 70 years ago. So we've had this particular way of conceiving of youth and, in fact, raising youth. It may be that it will be time for a new definition.
Let me ask you then about why this unhappy generation, as you describe it, is not in protest.
I'm hopeful that young people will find the solutions to the problems that they face. And they will do it in their own way, in the same way that we did it in their own way. And I don't want to judge. I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that young people aren't protesting like they used to, because maybe they are, and we don't know about it. I also think that if you talk about the tuition fees protest, they were pretty ruthlessly put down. And I think that a lot of young people, that's actually scared a lot of young people, to be fair. And I think I'd have been scared if I'd been involved with that.
Do you think then this generation, in a sense, Russell Brand has it right, that in fact your best vote is not to bother to vote at all?
Well, of course, I personally disagree. I think people should protest.
And should vote.
And should vote.
There's not much of an effort to connect with them, is there?
No, and that's part of the problem. Certainly, I mean, you know, on both sides, actually, although I do see the coalition government as particularly teenager unfriendly. And that to do is also because teenagers are not seen as having, this all started because teenagers were seen as having economic value. Now that the teenage range of products, the range of products that were aimed at teenagers in the 50s and 60s, they're bought by everybody. And the oldies like me have more money than teenagers. So there's a vast market, a vast section of the market appealing to 40, 50 and 60-year-olds. So the teenagers have rather been dumped, and because they have no economic value, they're seen as having no social value.
John, thank you very much indeed for talking for us.